Today's meeting. Thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to all new members who are here and for folks on the phone. I hope everybody had a chance to look at the website to see the material that Lori Amano, who's a partner at Cage Study Law Firm, is here to talk to us about today, which is a commercial lease form from the Hawaii Association of Realtors. The material that's on the website is available for everybody, and then Lori also brought hard copies of additional material.
There's some extra right there.
There's an extra one.
Okay, so there's some of that in the room. That stuff won't be on the website, so for those of you who didn't come today, you're lost. Lori is a very well-experienced attorney at Cage. You're a partner at Cage. You've been there since you graduated law school, right?
Mm-hmm.
10 or 11 years you've been at Cage. You've been specializing in real estate law. She graduated from Richardson summa cum laude, I believe, and had an undergraduate degree in biology and chemistry. So she's one of those really, really smart attorneys who knows practical science as well as how to practice law. And we're very fortunate to have her. So thank you, Lori.
Oh, wow, thank you. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. My name is Lori, and before I start my presentations, I like to do some icebreaker games. And mainly because my presentations are usually short, so this helps to, spend some time. So, who was the first person to arrive today? Was it?
It's somebody over there.
Alan Guido.
Oh, you were, all right. Well, you get $10 Starbucks gift card. Well, this is a good quality to have.
I'm being honest.
All right, next one. Is it anyone's birthday today? Or closest?
April 15th.
15. Happy birthday. I think you win the next $10 gift card. All right, the next one. The person who has the most children. So, anybody with 3 children? Anybody with more?
Yeah.
10. Okay, anybody with 4 children?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we have more than 1, then the tiebreaker is the person who has the oldest child.
5.
So of the people who have 3 children.
Who's 5?
So we have someone on the phone who had 5.
But you have to be present
Yeah,
to
you have
win.
to be
Sorry, guys.
Wait, someone's my proxy up there. My office up there.
I'll take it for you.
Okay, so of you guys with 3 children, how old's your oldest child?
72.
Right.
25.
Anybody with?
31.
I think you win the next prize, $10 Starbucks gift card. Okay, we have 2 more, right? We have 2 more gift cards? Okay. So who has been practicing law the longest? How many years?
Since Since 73.
Since when?
73.
My parents didn't even know each other yet. Okay. You win. And the last one goes to the youngest person in the room.
That's me.
How old are you?
26.
Anybody younger than 26? All right, you win, and welcome to the legal community. All right, so that took up about 2 minutes. Now for some background information. So we prepared these forms, we meaning me and Gino Gabriel, we prepared these forms free of charge, so pro bono as a community service. And our intent in preparing these forms was to provide a standard commercial lease forms, because over the years, we've all seen very terrible commercial lease forms, right? You've seen the lease forms done on the residential form, or, cut and pasted from many lease forms, or even California forms or other states' forms. And so it was because of this frustration of seeing all of these terrible forms, and when problems arise, people come to us and there's no solution because your document doesn't address it. So it was due to this frustration that we agreed to finally do a standard form that anyone can use. I think right now it is only supposed to be used by CCIM members, but I think they're trying to change that maybe within the next month or so. So it should be available to anyone, just like the residential lease form. You don't have to be a broker to use those. So, let's see. So ideally, our thought was that these lease forms should be filled out by an attorney. And the people that were pushing us to create these forms were the brokers, because a lot of times brokers do leases for their landlord clients because their clients don't want to pay for an attorney. So I don't know if filling out a form like this, a standard form by a broker, would be an unauthorized practice of law, but it probably could be. So maybe you want to tell your broker or other clients about that so you can get more business to fill these out. So we understood that there was this risk that brokers would be filling out these forms, but in reality, that is just the reality. We know that brokers do these things, so we thought it would be a good community service to put something out there that people can use that is standard, that won't cause too many problems, hopefully, when issues arise later on. So, we've heard attorneys complain to us that by creating a standard commercial lease form, we're going to be taking away their business. But, that is possible. But I think it's also possible that you're going to get more business out of these forms, because perhaps landlords that didn't want to go to an attorney before are more willing to go to an attorney just to fill out a standard form, because it's going to be a lot cheaper and less time consuming. So we know there's a lot of pros and cons to this form, but we think that there are definitely more benefits to landlords, tenants, property managers, and agents, to have this form in existence. So in the packet that I handed out, besides my propaganda in the front and my disclaimer, there are my notes for today's presentation, the current form of commercial lease, and behind there's 2 yellow pages. So behind the 2 yellow pages are red lines of the commercial lease and the percentage rent addenda. So these 2 forms are having some tweaking, and these changes they haven't been approved yet, so they might be approved, I think, next week or 2 weeks from now. And if they are approved, then these changes will be published in the November update. So you have 2 red lines of that. Also, we have the Exhibit C, the rules and regulations, Exhibit D, work letter, Exhibit F, option to extend, Exhibit G, guarantee of lease, and the Exhibit H, percentage rent, with also the revisions to the percentage rent. Okay, so let's turn to the lease, page 5 of 23. So I only mentioned certain exhibits. So if you look at page 5, all of those, check the boxes in the middle. Exhibit A, the site plan, and Exhibit B, site plan of the project, Exhibit E, B1. These are not included in the forms because these are property-specific documents that you're going to be getting from your landlords. Okay, so what type of lease is this? This is a commercial lease that can be used for industrial, office, or retail. This is not a residential lease form. This is a space lease, so lease of airspace and everything else, including the perimeter interior walls of a premises within a building. So this is not to be used for your land or ground lease. We will probably do a ground lease form in the future, but we're waiting to get all the kinks worked out of this form before we make any other forms. This is a triple net lease, so the tenant is responsible for rent, tenant share of property taxes, insurance, and operating costs. So if you have a client that wants to use a net lease where the tenant is responsible for just rent or property taxes, double net where they're responsible for rent, property taxes, and insurance, or gross rent where they just pay set rent and the landlord pays all operating expenses, or even a modified gross, then you're going to have to add an addendum or some kind of change to the special conditions of the lease. This is a multi-tenant lease, so this is a lease that you will use in the case where the building is owned by the landlord and there's more than one tenant. So this lease is not designed for a commercial condominium unit where the landlord does not own or control the entire building. That's a completely different lease form. You could convert this form to that type of form with the addenda, but I think it would take a lot of tweaking here and there, so it's probably best that you don't do that. Okay, other things to know about this form. So this form, we modeled it after the AIR form and Hawaiianized it to custom and practice here. And we think this is a fair form, fair to both landlords and tenants. Of course, slightly landlord favorable, otherwise landlords would not use it. And it's definitely a lot more tenant favored than any of our form leases that we use for our large landlord clients. So this lease is more of an end product of an almost heavily negotiated lease. This process that we did to come up with this lease must have been revised maybe 20 times. So we went through rounds and rounds of meetings, revisions, and we sent it out to the community. And when that happens, when there's so many people editing a document, some things might get deleted by accident, or you delete one thing and you forget, and you don't delete something else that should also be deleted. So if you see something like that in the form, please let me know, and we can put it on our agenda for the next round of changes. Have any of you seen this or used this in the past? It only came out in November. Okay, so if you do, please let us know if you see any problems. And this lease is only of course, only comes binding when it's executed by landlord and tenant. Okay, so how to use this form. So this lease has three parts. Part A, specific conditions. Part B, which is only on 2 pages. Part B, special conditions, and Part C, general conditions. So if you're looking at the lease, we tried to make this as user-friendly as we could. So that means that the only pages that need to be filled in are Part A, so that's pages 4 and 5, and Part B, page 6. So there's nothing in Part C, general conditions, that needs to be filled in. There's no blanks or check the boxes. Everything is in the first 3 pages, plus also the cover page when you can fill in your cover page, but that's about it. So if you look at the lease, page 4, at the top it says reviewed by, name of principal broker, broker in charge. That's something that the HAR put in. I think it has to do with their rules that anything that their brokers do or work on has to be signed by the principal broker. So in our case, that would just be left blank, or just put a not applicable. I think everything in here is self-explanatory. One thing to note, when you add your tenant's trade name, check with the DCCA to make sure that it's a registered trade name, because that could be issues if they're using a trade name that doesn't belong to them. Okay, let's see, if you go to section 5 term on page 4, so this is a check the box. So if you choose 5 years less 1 day, you are avoiding conveyance tax. So we put that option in there too, as a reminder, that's perfectly legal, pretty sure, to have your term 5 years less 1 day. Base rent, you're going to insert your base rent, and this is a monthly rent, so just keep that in mind. Sometimes people put annual rent. On the next page, page 5, section 7, tenant share of common area expenses. So this is a percentage, and if the tenant is going to be paying everything, then just put 100% there. Let's see. Everything else you just fill in like your other standard forms of leases. On page 6, your special conditions. So these are going to be your deal-specific terms that are not included in the specific conditions or vary from the general conditions. So you can list everything here on this blank page or just attach your own exhibit. And if there's a conflict between anything in your special conditions and any other part of the lease, the special conditions control. Okay, so you go to the document after the first yellow page, which is the pending changes. See, luckily none of you used this because what we forgot to put in the original was rent due date. So page 4, we thought it was just in the general conditions that it would be due on the first day of the month, but I guess we didn't have something in there that said when it would begin. So we clarified that on page 4, added sections 6 and 7. And we also rearranged the itemization of base rent on page 6. So the red line looks strange, but it's just a rearrangement that some of the brokers asked for because they found it confusing when they were filling out that part. And if you go to the second, the document after the second yellow page, these are the changes to the percentage rent addenda. So we just noticed that the check the boxes were in the wrong place. So if you are using the current form and your percentage rent is the natural breakpoint, then you just check the box and everything is fine. But if you are having some sort of unnatural breakpoint, then you would have needed to make these changes in your document. So for these, we had it that we also have checked the boxes that percentage rent can be annualized or not annualized. So if you're representing the tenant, you probably want it to be annualized. And if you're the landlord, depending on how fair you want to be, you could have it annualized as well. We have a radius restriction in here. It's on the second page of the Exhibit H. So it's a 3-mile default radius restriction, but there's also blank that you can fill in if you want it different. And the next one I wanted to discuss quickly was Exhibit F, which is option to extend. So this document, we are not going to have any changes as of now. So this one we also have check the boxes, so you fill in the number of additional periods and the duration of each period. And we also put a reminder that you could have an extension option of 5 years less 1 day to avoid conveyance tax. Perfectly legal. And depending on how you want to do your rent for the option period, you have two options. Check the box for predetermined base rent, or you check the box on the second page for fair market value rent through arbitration. So the fair market value rent, box 2, this one is baseball arbitration. So each side submits their dollar amount, and the arbitrator will pick either landlord's number or the tenant's number, whoever is closest to the fair market value. And there is also something in here that says the rent shall not be less than 103% of the base rent for the month immediately preceding the option period. So that can also be changed. So anything in these documents, you can change it with your own addenda. But just some things to be aware of that's in the form. Our Exhibit C, Exhibit D, we do, these are the rules and regulations at work letter. So we do have a lot of boilerplate verbiage in there, but we also have a lot of blank lines. So there's always gonna be space for you to customize these areas. And if you have a client that wants to use the standard form for, let's say, their warehouse building, or a small building that they have, you could just create an addenda that's applicable to their building, so that every time you do a lease for their building, you just tack that on, and the changes for you on your side would be very, very quick and simple. So, less than half an hour. Yes?
All right, on the conveyance tax,
Yes.
it was always our understanding that if you have an initial lease of less than 5 years, the conveyance tax is not applicable. But if you extend the lease so that that lease now is in excess of 5 years, then the conveyance tax is applicable to the entire lease. So the only way to be
Well,
sure to.
who said that?
The tax department.
Really?
Yeah.
I've not seen
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So the only way to really truly avoid the conveyance tax in that situation is to start with a new lease on the expiration of the original lease.
Right, you could do that, but is it really worth avoiding the
Well,
conveyance
that's,
tax, right?
It depends on how.
Because if I'm a
how much.
landlord, I probably don't wanna do that. What if there's hazardous materials, and if I give them a new lease, then I've just, cut off my liability?
Yeah, it's a business decision that the
Mhm.
parties make, but typically, we, in the cases where we extended a lease, we actually have the tenant pay the conveyance tax.
Mhm.
So you compute the conveyance tax from that point onward, as if you had done a lease, from day one through the end of the extension period. There's no penalty or interest or anything, because that converts the lease into a lease that's technically more than 5 years. So you might wanna double check that with the tax department, on the extension.
Yeah, well,
addendum.
I'll have our tax guy check, but I
Yeah.
feel like this has been vetted, and we've discussed it within our firm that there is no solid answer. People have different views on how to, or when to say conveyance tax does apply. Because let's say you exercise your option, and from that point, does your, they think that once you exercise your option, maybe the next term becomes more than 5 years because you exercised, 3 months plus your 5 years less 1 day, that's already gonna be that's more than 5 years. Or some people think, no, it goes by period, so.
Yeah. Actually, you can have your tax department check, because we've had some pretty extensive discussions on how to recompute the conveyance tax in those.
Okay.
Anyway, I just wanted to flag that.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment. I'm a broker also, and I teach continuing education courses at the Honolulu Board of Realtors. And you said that these just came out in November of 2014.
Mhm.
You know, because I've gotten questions when I've taught the classes, how come we don't have commercial forms available? Because commercial agents and brokers belong to the association. So I think this will really serve a need. But with regard to who can use the form, with the residential forms, only a realtor can use those forms. That is not just any licensee. You have to belong to the National Association of Realtors to be able to use that form. So since this has the realtor designation on it, I would think it's the same way, that it's not
Yeah,
available to
I'm not,
just-
no, I'm not sure. You'd have to check with, HAR
Okay.
on that, because I was told that this current form is only available right now to CCIM members, because it was a CCIM project that, we did this form for them. And I was also told that the residential form can be used by anyone,
No, it's not.
so.
The agents might get it from the Honolulu Board of, well, you get it actually from HAR, but the Honolulu Board of Realtors is the one that physically makes it available.
Mhm.
And then a lot of agents just hand it off to friends or whatever.
Right.
But legally, technically, it's only supposed to be used by people who are realtors. So not just licensees, but realtors. And so I'll raise that question, because I think, so actually this is only available right now for use since November to the CCIM members.
I think so.
Okay.
Lori, just, I don't know if it's gonna make it more confusing or not, but, we work with HBR on the standard forms. And prior to, in the past, HBR had a contract with HBR to use the rental agreement forms, and we're selling it to the public.
Oh, they
And
are.
that arrangement has ended, and HBR now still allows the public to have access to the forms.
Yeah.
Even if you're not licensed, but, the commercial
that's
side
what I
is
thought,
trying to seek
yeah.
the same kind of exemption. We're just trying to protect the copyright of the document
Right,
and have
so
control over the forms.
Does
So
the public now have to pay in order to
I
get that?
believe so. I believe so, to acquire and use of the residential form, and they're trying to do the same for the commercial.
And how do they get it then? Do they get it by just going to the Honolulu?
Online or directly to the board. Now, I'll confirm and let Lori know. I know there's been discussions to allow certain forms that are in common use. The concern was that they didn't want it modified or taken by an agent and somebody modified it. So we want to control the content, and one way was to allow the public to use it.
But you know, the legend at the top though says it's licensed for use by the entire real estate industry on condition that there be no alteration, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the boilerplate reads the same as looks like the same
Yeah,
as.
so
the
I'll follow up.
residential.
It's been a while now, so, we should confirm what the practice is, but we'll get back to you on that.
Because you can only get it from a realtor.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Laura, you
Yeah.
mentioned that there are changes in process.
Yes.
On the black lots.
Yeah.
When can we expect those to be finalized, and when can we expect the form to be completed?
Okay, so right now, this form, the non-red line form, is available for use. The red line, that's still, under discussion. I think there's a meeting next week to go over it, and if they approve it, then it's going to be released in November. They only release twice a year, right?
Right. Once the form is finalized, the Standard Forms Committee approves it, sends it to the Board of Directors. And so they try to time it so that the official
Mhm.
form
So,
comes out.
yeah, so the process to get a revision in takes a long time.
Although there's some exceptions, if there's legislative change, they'll shoot out a shorter form of temporary until the November change comes out. But in this kind of case, it'll probably be November.
Does this form shift the burden for the payment of conveyance tax to tenant?
I believe so. I haven't memorized it. I haven't read it in a while.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
that-
no, I didn't remember it either. Oh,
3.5 on page 9.
Oh, thank you.
Lori, you said that you folks got it, you wanted to help make a standardized form, and,
Mhm.
and you based it on more of a national form, and then
Yeah.
did some tweaks to make it more
Yeah.
specific to Hawaii. I'm just curious, like what helped make it more specific to Hawaii?
I guess the form that we were going off of, in certain areas, we've looked at many forms, certain areas of the country, you know, real estate is not as valuable as it is here. So in Hawaii, landlords have a lot more leverage. So the forms that we looked at on the mainland were very different from what we're used to seeing, where the landlord has to almost bend over backwards to get the tenant in. So we changed that to, I mean, maybe it's just also our point of view. You know, we represent mostly large landlords, so these are the types of documents we're used to seeing anyway. So that was our starting point from our perception, was that we needed to put more landlord language in, but then we could also see from these other national forms how tenants can be favored. So we tried to do some balancing, but we had to keep in mind that these forms would be the choice of the landlord to use. So if this was too tenant favored, nobody would use it. So we had a lot of discussion. We had a lot of tenant brokers that wanted a lot more change than this. Didn't happen, but you know, we saw both sides a lot.
When we had the Colliers guys come in, Colliers did a presentation on commercial real estate that we're in back in January, and they were saying that when they're dealing with mainland attorneys especially, and who want to come in as tenants, they come in thinking, okay, I'm gonna make 1,000,001 changes.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, save it, maybe you can make 5 changes, so make them worthwhile, because landlords here don't budge.
No, they don't have to.
So this will streamline that.
Yeah, hopefully. Still, I think it's still a work in progress. Nobody's really using it, so we don't know what issues are in here and if we need to change anything.
Does anybody on the phone have questions for Lori about these forms? Sounds pretty quiet.
Well, kudos to you for taking on this task. It's really monumental.
It took a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And not to pressure you, but when will the ground
Well, the CCIM Forms Committee, they haven't come to us yet with their request. So I'm gonna wait till they ask me for the 10th time to do it.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then we'll say thank you very much,
Thank you.
Lori.
Thank you.